Okay, so if you haven't already done so, make sure you start up the VMware virtual machine and also the My Docker machine. Yeah, I already started mine up. And then we're gonna start by going to Laulima. Hopefully folks can connect. We had some problems earlier. Some DNS servers were not working correctly, so but hopefully you can get in. If you can't get in, then raise your hand, and then at least then I'll put up a IP address that will allow you to connect there in the non-secure way, but you still can get to all the things that we need to. Okay, so yeah, go ahead and try to log in to Laulima if you haven't already done so. If you can't connect, then raise your hand, and then we can do something hopefully about that. Okay, so on Laulima, in resources, the daily work folder, there's a folder with today's date. But before I go to that one, let me go to the folder from last time, so the class on Monday, the 4th. If you look inside of there, there's a number of files in there besides the HTML file that basically outline what we covered last time. So the insert funcs.sql, init.sql, those are things which you could just copy and paste and create them, or you could just download those if you were not here last time. The add initial data.sql is the incomplete version of this. This is basically just so that it adds in the surveys and questions. And then the add to initial data.py, that Python script, is not fully complete. All it processes is the results1.csv, but it doesn't yet process the results2.csv. That's where I left it last time, although most people, not most, but some people were able to just continue and update it. So these two are not the finished versions of those files, but those two are. Yeah, another thing, let me, if you were not here last time, if you go to the resources folder and go to labs, then the lab 6 folder has these two files, results1.csv and results2.csv, and those need to be copied into the lab 6 folder that's inside of docs. Okay, so if I go to Windows Explorer and I go into the main Docker folder, and then from there I go into docs, and then I go into lab 6, you need to copy those files into there so that when we get into the Postgres SQL container, we can run Python, we can run that Python script to process. And mine right now just processes this file, but you can easily make it so that it also processes that file, and then basically write to, append to add initial data.sql so that that works correctly. Okay, so what we want to do today okay, so I'm returning back to daily work and then going to the folder with today's date on it. is we want to complete lab 6. Okay, I had some views there that you may or may not have made use of last time, but you can just copy and paste those into a file called addviews.sql, so you can add those views. And you can use those to verify that your data was inserted correctly. Now, what we want to do is the following. Okay, so let me make this a little bit bigger, okay, on this page at least. And we're going to create this file. Now, this file already comes from this link, but we need to modify it, and we need to modify it in a couple of ways. One is we want to make it so that it actually has a parameter, because right now it's parameterless, but we want to make it so that it uses a parameter, and I name my parameter _survey_code. You recall that for PL/PGSQL functions, the parameters, my convention, not necessarily anybody else's, is that for the parameter names, I start off with a single underscore so that it doesn't collide with any database field names. Because again, my convention, I never give database field names a name that starts with a single underscore, right? So that way it never collides in my way of doing things. Okay, so let's then start up a couple of ConEMU terminals, because it'll be useful to have more than one open. Okay, so here, let me open up one and then a second one. Okay, and then for both of them, I need to set the environment variables coming from the Docker machine. Okay, so let me start off with that. Okay, so I'm going to do that in both of my ConEMU terminals. Okay, and then after that, I'm going to change into the main Docker folder. In both terminals. Okay, so I got my environment variables loaded in both terminals. I'm in the main Docker folder for both terminals. And then I'm going to go into the PostgreSQL Docker container. Okay, so Docker, for first, I got to start up my containers. Okay, so in one of the terminals, I just go Docker compose up -d so that it runs that process in the background. And then when that starts up, then in both terminals, I'm going to go into the PostgreSQL container. Yeah, we don't need a PHP Apache container for Lab 6 or Lab 7, which we'll take a look at. Okay, so to go into the PostgreSQL container and execute bash, that's the command. Hopefully by now that's something you folks have pretty much memorized. Okay, and then since I'm working on Lab 6, in both of these, I'm going to change into the Lab 6 folder. Okay, so cd/home/lab6. I'm going to do that in both terminals. Okay. And that's because what I'd like to do is have one of the terminals connected directly to the lab6_db database, and the other terminal in case I need to do anything in Python, anything further in Python. Okay, so in this first terminal, I'm going to connect to the lab6_db database. Okay. If you type \d, that displays all the tables, sequences, and views. I don't have any views yet. I didn't create that part of it. But it would also display the views there if I did that. If you do \df, f meaning function, it puts up the two functions that we added last time, add answers and then add question. And then when we create our query funcs.sql and we include that, that's going to add the get results function as well. Okay, so just connecting there, and then so I want that open, but I want to also possibly run more Python scripts. Let me double check. I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to open add initial data.sql. I'm going to open that with Genie. And this is the one that's directly copied from the web pages. Okay, and so it's incomplete. And then let me also open, okay, here, the Python script that we worked on last time. Okay, so where this wound up is basically, so it processes results1.csv. We need to process results2.csv at the same time, and then just append this. Okay, so what I'm going to do, since I want you to work that out, because I think that's pretty straightforward for you folks to do, is I'm going to just run this pretending that my Python script is done. Okay, it's not, but I'm going to pretend that it's done. Okay, so if I go to this terminal, okay, so to add to initial data.py, it processes only results1.csv. Okay, and you want it to process both results1.csv and results2.csv. Okay, so let me run that again. That's all it does. Since I want to append this to add initial data.sql, then I put the double greater than sign, so it doesn't overwrite it, it just adds on to the end of it. Okay, so now if I take a look in Genie at that file, then it has 3 additional select statements here where it's adding in the results from results1.csv. When you do yours correctly, you're going to have all the results, yeah, from results1.csv and results2.csv. Okay, but I'm going to pretend that this is done. It's not done, but this is enough so that I can work on the next part. Yeah, it's not complete, but it's enough to work on it. If you try to do it in a couple of pieces, when you work out this part, you could take out the print statements here and then only have print statements here. When you do run it a second time, then you again use the double greater than sign. It'll just append to the end if you wanted to do it that way. Okay, but I think it's easier if you make it so that it processes both at the same time, and then just in one shot, you basically update your add initial data.sql. Okay, so what I would like to do is I'm going to reinitialize. What happened? Oh, sorry, I got more stuff that begins with I. All right, so I reinitialize the database, and then I'm going to add my initial data. Okay, so I put the data in there. After I do that, not complete, but let's show you what actually is complete. No, Python to to add initial data, that SQL, to this one here. And then I just included it just a bit before it. Okay, so let me repeat what I just did there. First I reinitialize, and then I put in my initial data.sql. Okay, when you do that, because I didn't really complete mine, I didn't process results2.csv, the surveys table, the questions table, those are what they should be. But if I look at, okay, if I look at the answers table, that's going to be incomplete at this point. Okay, but that's okay. We can still proceed on the next part. Okay, so if I go select star from surveys, okay, that's correct. And then if I say select star from questions, that also is correct. That's as far as that has to go. But if I say select star from answers, then I only have the first 3 rows, and actually that should have 6 rows. Okay, but that's okay. It's still, there's enough stuff in there so that we can still get this, the rest of the parts to work. You could, in fact, let's do this right now. I'm going to go to Genie. I'm going to create a new empty file. Then I'm going to go back to the web page for today, and it says, look, I can create add views.sql by grabbing those 2 things. Okay, so those 2 create. So I'm going to Control C and paste this into here, and then I'm going to save that as my add views.sql. Okay, so save. Want to put it in lab 6. Okay, check that it's the one inside of docs, which is inside of the main Docker folder. And this is going to be add underscore views dot SQL. Okay, so I got that right off of our web page for today. Actually, that was there in the last one as well. Okay, so that's just, that part is a repeat, but I didn't actually create it. I save this here, then I go to my page that my terminal that's connected to the database, and I can what happened? Oh, I know what happened. Sorry. I put drop view without putting if exists. Okay, so actually I have an error. Because if the view doesn't exist, you can't drop it. So let me, actually, if I run it again, it'll drop it and then create it. Okay, so it probably did create it correctly before that. Let me just show you another thing. If I do \d, remember how I said it shows you the tables and sequences? It now also shows you those views. So let's check out the views. I'm going to go select star from survey questions view. And you can see for survey A, which has this survey code, these are the 3 questions. And then for survey B, those are the 3 questions, right? That from the very beginning for add initial data.sql, those things would have all been inserted. Now, from that view, let's suppose I only wanted to display the questions for the first survey, then I could do this. one way would be where ID equals 1, right? That's one way to do it. I could also put where title equals single quotes around survey A, or where survey code equals quotes around this, and I could have pulled up that same information, right? So I can put a where clause on that view, and then I can bring up just one of the survey questions. And actually, that particular type of thing is useful, because if you were creating a web form that's going to let people take the survey, then on each of those pages where they're taking the survey, you need to display all the questions, right? And then you need to, so you need to be able to do that. All right. And the other view, okay, we'll just do \D so you can see. The other view is question_answers view. And now I have actually 4 records in there. Oh, 3 records in there. What am I saying? Okay, so 3 records are in there. So this is spread out kind of wide, so it's hard to see. So I'm going to put \A so that the format is unaligned, and then I'll run this again, and then it's easier to see. Okay, it's not aligned, but you can see all the data on one line for each record. And then you could check to see if those numbers are correct, and in fact, those are correct. Okay, so it would have shown more records if you completed and you processed results2.csv in addition to results1.csv. So this is incomplete, right? It's not what it should be when you actually take a look at that. Okay, but it is a way of verifying, okay, it looks like the data is coming in correctly so far. Okay, so what I want to do is come back here, and it says create a file, queryfuncs.sql, that will have a function called getResults that is patterned after the getResults function from this link. Okay, so when I click on this link, this is of course on the main CENT280 website, and the getResults function is close to the bottom. Okay, so this part, remember, we went over these things a little bit last time. This just kind of gives background on how you create PLPG-SQL functions. Okay, so it's very close to the bottom. If you wanted to get there faster, you could hit a Control F, so do a find, and just type get_results, and then it takes you to there, and then so you can get there faster. Okay, so what I want to do is create a file called query_funcs.sql that contains this. Now you can use a lot of this, so what I want to do is create an empty file, right? Come back to this, and I'm going to highlight this, okay? Control C, and I'm going to paste it here. And I'm going to give it a name here. And I'm going to save this, save it to my Lab 6 folder, and this is going to be query_funcs.sql. Okay, so the idea is that this is the file that's going to contain our query functions. And in this case, there's only one function, that's my getResults function. Okay, so as it talks about, you need to make changes to the body of this function, and that's because this one was developed for a survey that the radio buttons, there was only a choice of 1, 2, and 3, but yours has numbers for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so both on line 17 and on line 18, you need to add in the corresponding stuff for rec.num4 and rec.num5. Now, this is basically a weighted average. So you take the number of 1s and you multiply by 1. You take the number of 2s and you multiply by 2. you take the number of 3's and you multiply it by 3, right? Adding all those up. Then you got to add it to the number of 4's multiplied by 4 plus the number of 5's multiplied by 5. Yeah, that's so you can get the weighted average. The denominator, pretty simple. It's just rec.num1 plus rec.num2 plus rec.num3 plus rec.num4 plus rec.num5. Okay, so this will do the right computations. However, it says select star from results. Okay, and right now we have no table called results, so we need to fix this a little bit, right? So let's look back at our database. If we do \d, okay, then the table name is actually answers, right? And let's do this also. Okay, so I'm going to go \d answers so that you can, without having to look up init.sql, you can see the definition for the answers table. Okay, so this is not aligned because I had typed \a before that. Let me type a \a again to align it. And then let's take a look at the answers table again. A little bit easier to look at. Why do we want to look at this? Because we want to figure out what the field names that are defined inside of the answers table. Okay, so if I look at this answers table, okay, I'm going to have ID, the question ID, and then num1, num2, num3, num4, num5. Okay, so that table, okay, the tricky part is how do I specify which survey that we want to display the results for? And you can't get the survey directly from this, but if you have the question ID and you look at the questions table, then you might be able to figure it out. Okay. Also, let's take a look at a couple other things. Okay, if you look at the views, maybe we can use those views. So here's the questions answers view. Okay, and that one looks maybe a little more promising because we got the question ID, we got the question text, we got the survey ID, which would allow us to specify which survey. Then we got num1, num2, num3, num4, num5. So that actually looks more promising in terms of the function we have to write. Okay, so let's start off by saying instead of select star from results, we're going to say select star from the question underscore answers underscore view. Okay. Now, there's no semicolon at the end of this. Let me explain this. Because this statement is not complete. Because as part of this statement, okay, we're setting this up inside of a for loop in the PLPGSQL function. Okay, so the syntax of it is a little bit bizarre if you're not used to this, so let's go over that. Okay, so here's begin and end. That means all our main code goes there. So for rec, which means so my loop variable for a record in this query, right? So for something in select star from question answers view, perform this loop. So the loop will start here, it'll end here. And what it does is it does these calculations, and then there's a return next. Return next is a very interesting function, at least from my perspective, because normally in a function, when you say return, then basically the function stops. But if you do return next, all it does is it returns that value, and then it goes to the next repetition of the for loop. So this just means keep returning things while the for loop is running, and then stop when the for loop is done. So what does it return? It's going to return the question text and the average. Okay, so let's talk about what that actually means in this case. Okay, I put my local variables underscore top and underscore bottom. That's really the numerator and the denominator of a fraction, which gives us the weighted average. Okay, so the way you get the weighted average is you multiply the numbers by the corresponding weight. So the number of ones multiplied by 1, number of twos multiplied by 2, number of threes multiplied by 3, okay? And then you got to add on, because we also have number of 4s and number of 5s. You got to add that on, right? So this is incomplete, not correct at this point. And then the bottom is the denominator. That's just the total of all the numbers. The total number of 1s, number of 2s, number of 3s, plus number of 4s, plus number of 5s. Okay? So not what I have printed here, because that's incomplete, right? It doesn't take into account the num4 and the num5 field values, okay? But you have to take that into account. Okay, so the average basically is that fraction, okay? And then we round it off, and then we cast it to type numeric, and we say 2 numbers after the decimal place. Okay, that's all that means. That would be difficult syntax to figure out on your own, but you don't have to, because that part you don't have to adjust. Okay, so what it's going to do is going to return the text, and then it's going to return the average. Okay, so let's go back. Let's take a look back, look at the view. Okay, it's going to, yeah, we got the question text, and we got num1, num2, num3, num4, num5. So it should be able to use all those values. Okay, select star from question answers view. This was a earlier example of doing that. Okay, so let me do that again. Select star from question underscore answers view. Okay, and it puts these things up. Okay, so we know we can get the question text, and we can get num1, num2, num3, num4, num5. So we got the values in there. So this is closer to what we have. It's not complete yet, right? Yeah. Oh, not this one. So, did you run this? Did you include that? Yeah, include this one. So backslash I. Oh, the insert funcs, you got to include that first. So just include that first. Yeah. And then run the same thing again, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then it should be in there. Okay, now, when it does this return next, okay, if you look up a little higher, this is saying return set of my type. And my type is a custom type that I defined right above there, right? So we need to take a look at that. But this, if you go returns int, then it's going to return an integer. So the check ID function, we had return int. When we had some things which just inserted some values in, we returned void because it doesn't return anything. But when you want to return multiple values in a PL/PGSQL function, then one way to do that is using a set of a type. Okay, you could also return a table, but here it's a type. And then what I did is I created that type right above here. Now when you create the type, it's not really difficult to create a type, but you need to declare what the type of each of the variables are, right? So here I'm going to create type my type as, so this is my type. It's going to have question text, which is a text variable, and average, which is a float variable, because that's going to be a number with 2 digits after the decimal place. So I create that type, and it's going to return a set of that, which means my for loop is going to run. It's going to return things that have this format, the question text, and then the average. and it'll return it for as many times as necessary, okay, to complete that for loop. Now, this is not quite set up completely correctly yet, okay, because we would like to, okay, we would like to make it, as it says in today's page, we want to make it so that you pass a parameter survey code so that the results can be returned for a given survey code. All right, so let's start to try to implement that. Okay, so here, underscore survey code. I put an underscore so it won't collide with the actual field name, survey underscore code, right? And now we need to think of how we're going to modify this query here, okay, so that it works correctly. Okay, so we need to actually look at, in fact, let me open up init.sql, because that's probably going to be the easier way to do that. Oh, and yeah, so we have addViews.sql. So let's take a look at this. Okay, we can get the question text, num1, num2, num3, num4, num5. We got all of those things. And then we also have the ID of the question, and we have the survey ID, but we don't have the survey code. Okay, so we need to do something that's gonna help us make this work correctly. Okay, so let's look back inside of the database, and let me hit a \A so that when I run a query, I can see stuff easily. It's not lined up nicely, but I can see all the fields on one, all the values for one record on one line. Okay, so what I get is the ID, survey ID, question text, num1, num2, num3, num4, num5. Okay, so that's good, sort of, because I need question text, I need num1, I need num2, num3, num4, num5. I need all of those. But I would like to say, select star from questions view where something, right, where the survey ID is something, or where the ID is something, in order for this to work. So let's look at what we have actually available. Okay, so here, this is questions ID. Okay, so this is the ID of the question. That's not going to help us, because when we want to select for a given survey, there's more than one question, right? So the ID of the question is not going to help us. The survey ID, that should help us. Okay, so if I did this, select star from questions view where survey ID equals 1, then it'll return those results. The other survey, the ID is 2, but I don't have any results for there yet because I was incomplete on my Python script, so it shows 0, but yours would not show 0. So we could do it based upon the survey ID, but the survey ID is something that's not known to a typical user that wants to use this stuff for some kind of application, some kind of database application. But they would know the survey code. And that's why, if you look at this, we're going to make it based on survey code, because they should know the survey code, although they won't know the survey ID necessarily. Okay, but we can help out to make this work by doing the following. Okay, so let's create another variable, local variable. We don't want this to collide with survey ID, right? We don't want it to collide with this survey underscore ID. So that's why I name it underscore survey underscore ID. And this is just an integer. Okay, so I'm going to add that in. Now, it would be nice if we could go select star from question and answer view where survey ID equals underscore survey ID. But we got survey code, not survey ID. So we need to do a little bit more work. Okay, so what we do, we know the survey code, we're going to go select, sorry, let me use a record again, sorry. So I'm going to go select into, oh, keep forgetting this in there. Select star into rec. Okay, so select all fields into rec where from surveys. Okay, so let's look at surveys. Select star from rec, okay, where the survey code is whatever the past survey code is. Okay, so from surveys where, let me put this on the next line, where survey code, that's the field name equals or matches the past survey code. Okay, so let's go over that, right? Because this is PLPGSQL. Select all the fields into this record from the surveys table where the survey code field matches the past survey code, the one that's passed to this function, right? So the one that the user supplies when they call this. Okay, now, what could happen is if it's an invalid survey code, then there's no records that are found. So let's test for that. So we go if not found, then, and don't forget to put an end if at the end of this. If not found, we gotta somehow return something which is like a set of my type. Okay, or we don't want to do anything in this case, but we don't want this to continue. So we'll return something that looks like this. We'll go return and not found and 0 or something like that. Okay, so if it's not found, then it's just going to return and it won't do the for loop. That's basically what it's saying. Okay, but otherwise, if it is found, then what we want to say is underscore survey underscore ID equals the record, and it's going to be the survey ID, so then that's ID. Okay, so how do I know it's ID? If I look back at the survey table, if I go select star from surveys where the survey code is this, then the ID for the survey is this ID, right? This field right here. Okay, so once I get the survey ID, to store it, look at this set of symbols. It's a colon and then an equals. Okay, so a single equals is actually the test for equality, yeah? Because SQL, the test for equality is just a single equal sign, not like Python or Java where it's double equals to test for equality, right? So this right here, that's a test for equality. That's not the assignment operator. So they needed to come up with an actual different operator for assignment, and that's what it is, colon equals. And actually, when I first started programming, one of the first languages I learned was Pascal, and that's the assignment operator that they use in Pascal, because when they test for equality, they use a single equals, okay, not double equals like more modern programming languages use. Okay, so what I need to do then is I need to make use of this survey ID that I find here, and so where survey ID matches underscore survey ID. Okay, and once again, no semicolon at the end because this just determines the set yeah, the record set that's going to be used for the for loop. Okay, so let me say it again, right? We're going to go for a record in this record set. Okay, so the records that are returned from that query, then loop over the contents of that record set. That's what basically those statements are taking care of. All right, so to test this out, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to include queryfuncs.sql. I'm going to include this, and then I'll try it out inside of the database and then see what we get. Okay, so I'm going to include query_funcs.sql. Okay, and it says my type does not exist, skipping. That's okay, that's a notice. Oops. Okay, I do have an error in there, so, and these line numbers may or may not tell me the correct line number. Okay. Okay, I'm not sure where that's occurring. Oh, sorry, looking in the wrong place. Okay, when you specify your parameters in PLPGSQL, the function, then you have to say the type. Okay, it's kind of odd because in Java, when you specify the variable type in the parameter list, it's the type and then the variable name. But in PLPGSQL, the order is opposite, and actually I forgot that completely, which is why I was getting that error message that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me at first. Okay, so I'm going to try to re-include it, and oh, it doesn't like that set. Okay. I'm trying to think of what I can substitute for that. Because it's not going to, I need to put a set of my type. Let's see. So text. So it doesn't like the parentheses. So it's saying hint, return next. I don't think that is quite right, but let me see what happens there. Okay, usually I don't even take into account this part here, but let's try to see if we can make that work. Okay, so it may or may not have worked. It doesn't find a syntax error. Okay, so what can we do? If that's in there, so let's do the following first. I'm going to go back to that df, so it displays all the functions. Okay, so we got add answers, add question, and now we have get results. Okay, so the way you call the function, a PLPGSQL function, is you to first select, then get results, and what I need to do is pass the survey code. Okay, so if I put the survey code Okay. SP 2018 underscore survey 1. Then, oh, okay, that came back to bite me. The reason why is I didn't update my top and bottom values, okay? So that's why I get that. Okay, sorry, I gotta actually fix that. Okay, so that's because this part right here. Okay, so I'm gonna do this wrong. It's wrong because I didn't fix the numerator, the top. The bottom is now correct, and then I won't get the divide by 0 anymore. Because one of the records, one of the questions, num1, num2, and num3 were all 0. So it just, that's why I got a divide by 0 problem. Okay, so I fix it partially, but it's not completely fixed. All right. So if I run that again, then oh, I forgot, right, to re-include it. So even though I made a change, I forgot to re-include it. Okay, let's see if I get it right this time. Okay, so I get this. Now, those numbers are not correct because the numerator is not correct, right? I didn't put in the 4 times num4 plus 5 times num5. But that's basically what we see there. However, suppose I do this, I don't have the values in there yet, but when I do that, put those numbers in, then that would be updated if I fix my function. Okay, but what if I put in something that doesn't exist? Then you're going to get this kind of error. And the reason why is because return next, it satisfied the syntax part of it, but that's not actually returning the thing in a correct way. So I would have to think about what you would do, but this particular error, when you do that, that's okay. It just means that this survey code doesn't exist. Okay. So I'm not sure how to return out of that when you have a set. I'll figure that out later. But for now, that's good enough, because then at least your syntax, you won't have a syntax problem and you can bring it in. So this is wrong because the underscore top is wrong, right? But then other than that, this basically works correctly. Okay. So that's the idea inside of your query underscore funcs.sql. Okay, so what you want to do is first go back, or you can put in your add views. You're going to need this view here so that your get results can work correctly. Okay, you want to modify get results so that it works correctly. You also want to make sure you add in all the results, right? Not just the results from the first survey, but you also process results2.csv. And then what you need to do basically is, that's different from what I have here, you got to fix the numerator, because the numerator is not correct yet. It doesn't have all the weighted score. Okay, so I want you to go ahead and work on that. If you have questions, raise your hand and I'll come around and help you. And then later on, if we have time, we'll start on lab 7. Okay, so I'm going to take a look at then lab 7. All right, so there's stuff from lab 6. Okay, so here's start on lab 7, so I'm going to click on that link. Okay, we're going to do authentication functions using PLPG-SQL. This one, you need to start this correctly, otherwise nothing is going to work. Okay, so the first thing is we're going to create a new database, lab7_db, and we're going to add the PG crypto extension. The PG crypto extension is going to give us the ability to do the SHA-512 hash inside the Postgres SQL database, just like equivalent to doing the SHA-512 hash with the PHP functions that we used earlier, right? So this one, we want to do that same kind of salting and hashing, so we need a SHA-512 hash. That's from a function called digest inside the PG Crypto extension. Okay, so how is this going to work? Okay, so we gotta make sure we do this carefully. I'm going to go back to this terminal. I'm going to go \Q so that I'm not in that database. Here, we need to make a new directory. So we'll make a new directory called lab7 and we start moving to there. But we could actually make changes before we do that, but let's not do that. I'm going to go back here. Here's lab6 where we're doing everything. We're going to go to docs and we're going to create a new folder called lab7. Okay, so new folder lab7. Okay, and then inside of our two conemu terminals, I'm going to change into the lab7 directory. Okay, so I did that there. And I did that there. I went up a level, then I dropped down into lab7. So in both of them, I'm in the lab7 directory right now. This next command, which is going to go into the PostgreSQL server as a super user, you could have done it from any terminal because we're not going to include any files yet. But we do want it to be in this location for some of the things that we do inside of there. Okay, so let's do this. All right, so PSQL-U, capital U, CENT280 man, CENT280DB, okay, and then remember the password is just PGSQL_man for the super user. Okay. And first step, create database lab7_DB owner Bob. Okay, so this is same thing we did for all the other databases that we created, right? Create database lab7_DB owner Bob. The next part is very, very different from anything we've done so far, and that is we're going to change database. So I'm going to go \C and then I'm going to put lab7_DB. Now before I hit enter, let me explain what we're doing here. When I logged into the super user account, the database that I connected to was CENT280DB. So if you look at the prompt here, it says CENT280DB, right? And then it has the pound symbol because this is a super user, right? It's a root user that's accessing PSQL. When I do \C and I put lab7_DB, it's going to ask me for the password, which is PGSQL_man. But look at the prompt. Whereas before we were connected to the CENT280DB database, now we're connected to the lab7_DB database. And we're connected as a super user. That's why there's that pound symbol instead of the greater than symbol. The reason why we want to do this is in order to execute the next command, which is create extension PG Crypto. Okay, let me type that out. Create extension PG Crypto. If I tried to do this as Bob, it wouldn't let me. It's not going to let me create any extensions. So, and also, if I didn't change database and I went create extension PG Crypto, it would work, but it would add it to the CENT82B and CENT280DB database, not lab7_DB. Right? So very important. Change to this. So now the prompt is this, but we're still logged in as super user. because when you create an extension, you have to be super user in order to do that. Yeah.
How do you delete a database?
Oh, let's say you messed up a database. That's a good question. Okay, so let me go /C and I'm going to go back to CENT280 DB. Okay, so let's say I messed up my lab 7 DB as an example. You just go drop database like that, and then the database will be dropped. Okay, so let's go through those steps again, right? Create database, lab7_DB, but I want to make the owner Bob. Okay. I change to that database. Okay, so you see the prompt change, and then I go create extension PG crypto. Okay. Now, there's one more thing we have to do as super user, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out and connect as Bob, and then we'll look around a little bit as the Bob user. Then we're going to do the next step, which I'll go back to the web page so you can see. Okay, but I quit. So if I connect as Bob, okay, some pass. Look carefully, the prompts are not the same, right? This is super user, that's why there's a pound symbol. When I'm logged in as Bob, it has a greater than symbol there. I mean, as a regular user. So some of the things that only the super user can do, Bob cannot do. And one of those things is modify the PG crypto extension. Now, why in the world would we want to modify the PG crypto extension? It's not absolutely required. However, this is what you're looking at. Let me do a /A so it's unaligned, the format. And then I'm going to do /DF. When I just created a database, normally if I do /DF, it's going to say there's nothing there because I didn't add any functions unless I ran a SQL script that included some PLPG SQL functions. But when you do create extension PG crypto, then you get a lot of functions, okay? 36 of them actually, okay? But out of all of those functions, the only ones I need is the ones named digest. In fact, I actually only need one of the digest functions, but that's okay. I'm going to eliminate all of those except the ones named digest, because that's the only ones that I need, all right? So if I hit a Control L, is this regular user or super user? Regular, because there's a greater than symbol, not the pound symbol, right? So this is Bob logged in like this. Okay, so if I return back to the page, it says, you know, we do these things, we quit out of there. It says, follow the instructions at the following link, basically, to install the PG crypto extension and remove the unwanted functions. So what does that mean? Well, let's click on this link so that you can see. PSQL is super powerful. It can do all kinds of things. One of the things it can do is, while you're inside of PSQL, you can actually write to output files. So let's say I wanted to show the results of some kind of query or something like that. I could go /O. I put the name of the file I want to write it to. Okay, the name of the file I want to write to. Then I execute the command. Okay, so in this case, I just displayed a customer's table definition. That's what I'm doing. But I could go select star from some table name. It's going to write all of that to that text file. When you hit /O the second time, then it ends the output. So it like finishes writing to the contents of that file. So if you wanted to get a record of some sort of query and save that to a text file, then PSQL actually lets you do that very easily. Okay, so for example, okay, I'm inside a Lab 7 DB. nothing in there to do with yet. But what if I did the following, go \C lab6 underscore DB, and I put some pass. Now I'm in the lab6 database, right? I just change it. That's what \C is, change. So if I did this, select star from surveys, that's what you see something like this. Or if I went \A and I ran that, it's going to look like this, right? It does it align. Now watch what happens. I'm in the lab 7 folder, okay, because I don't want to mess up my lab 6 folder. I'm just going to erase this afterwards. But I'm actually in the lab 7 folder right now. But watch this, I'll go \O and I'll just call this test.txt. That's how you name the file. And then if I type select star from surveys, instead of showing it to the screen, it actually wrote it to the output file. So if I go \O, it completes writing that. Take a look at this. I'll go here, open up lab 7. Remember I said I was in the lab 7 folder, not the lab 6 folder. If I open this up with Genie, then there it's right there, right? So I save the results of anything I can execute in PSQL to an output file. So that could be very useful. In fact, if I had something like this and I needed this to be in a Word document, this easy, right, to copy and paste this into a Word document. Okay, so maybe you think, oh, I wish I knew this earlier, then it would have been easier to do some of the assignments. True, okay, but you didn't, so too bad. Okay, so I'm going to close that, and I don't really need this file. Yeah, that was just a test. I'm going to get rid of it because I don't want it to confuse me later on. Okay, so I now would like to go back to lab 7. So because I want to go back some pass, type that there. Okay. Now lab 7, okay, I'm going to check my format, unaligned. That's what I want. Okay, so that's the first step, really important. Output format is unaligned. Okay, so if I do \DF, it looks like this. Okay, if it were aligned and you went \DF, it's going to look like this. Not correct. We don't want that because when we write a function, a program that basically is going to get rid of all the functions except the digest one, we don't want to have to deal with all the extra white space in there. Okay, so Q to quit out of there because it would have shown more. Okay, so \A says output format is unaligned, right? That toggles back and forth. So it should be unaligned, so you check, you go DF, go, yep, that's how it is because it's all squashed in like this. When that's correct, okay, I'm going to type a Q so that it stops the more, right? And I hit a Control L to clear it. I'm going to go \O, and the Python program we're going to use expects the name of these functions to be stored in a file called functions.txt. Okay, so you want to type it just like that. Okay, so now it opened the file for writing. It didn't write anything to it. \DF would display all the functions, not to the screen now, but to the file functions.txt, and then \O quits out of there. Okay, so I go back to Genie and I say open, and I need to get to my lab 7 folder. So I'm going to start way up at CENT280, then go to documents, Docker, main Docker folder, docs, lab 7, and there it is, functions.txt. Okay, that's what it should look like. If it has all the spaces in there, right, that means you did it when it was aligned, not aligned. So let's say that happened. Pretend this was bogus. Pretend it was wrong. That's okay. You go here, right? You make sure that it's not aligned, right? Aligned would be bad. So we hit \A again, so it is unaligned. Then I go \O functions.txt, \DF, \O, and it just overwrites the one that I had before. So if I come back to this, and reload it, it would have been fixed. Okay, so that's the first step. Make sure that this thing is fixed like this. You don't want it in the aligned format, too much extra white space. The Python program I created doesn't, it assumes that all that white space is not there. Okay, so that's the first step. Okay, so what's going to happen is that if you take this Python program, which assumes, okay, that the name of that file is functions.txt, it's going to write to a file drop.sql that's going to basically fix things. So I go new, empty folder, the empty file, okay, come back to this page, the one that I jumped to, right, that says using PSQL to write to output files. I'm going to highlight this program, okay, and I'm going to paste it in here, and I'm going to save this as make_drop.py inside of the lab 7 folder. Okay, so make_drop.py. In fact, I should probably have added that as a comment at the top. Okay, so I just copy that. I don't do anything to that file. I just do a straight copy and paste into there. Okay, now in my lab 7 folder, I have functions.txt, which I created from inside of PSQL, okay, and then I have makeDrop.py that I just created by doing copy and paste. So I'm going to run Python 3 makeDrop.py. It writes all that stuff to the screen, but more importantly, it created the file drop.sql. Let's look at drop.sql. So we'll go back to Genie, we'll open it there. Okay, what it does, to change the PG crypto extension is a 2-step process. And it can only be done by the super user. So if I try to run this as Bob, not going to work. Okay? And we can do that. You can test it to prove that that doesn't work. But you alter the extension name PG Crypto by dropping the function. The function has to have not only the name, but the parameter list. And the parameter list that is put here, okay, you don't have to put the names of the parameters, you just have to put the types. Okay, and that's why it's pulled straight out of \df. Otherwise, this would be a lot of stuff to have to type, right? I wouldn't want to do it. Okay, and then after you alter the extension, then you can drop those functions. Same thing, you need the parameter list. Yeah. Okay, so remember how I created this? From the page that talks about using PSQL to write to output files, there's a Python script. I just copied that and pasted it into makeDrop.py. And then in my terminal that's connected to Lab 7, then I just ran this, and that creates drop.sql. Okay, if I run it again, it just rewrites the same thing again. So drop.sql.
It was the using PLP GSQL functions?
No, we're not. There's just a Python program, but the web page is, yes, using PSQL to write to output files. And where that's from is from Lab 7. Just click on this link and it'll jump to there. Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit more, and I'm going to stop and walk around and help you with this. Okay, so drop.sql got created. Suppose I attempted to run drop.sql to get rid of all the extra functions that I don't need. Am I in as super user or regular user? Regular. So that's the reason why it does this. But look at this. Error, error, error. Okay, all errors did not work. So if I did \df function's still all there, right? Because you gotta be super user to alter the PG crypto extension. So, what I need to do, okay, is quit out of the database as Bob, go back into the database as CENT280 man. So I go PSQL-U CENT280 man-W. Usually we type CENT280DB because that's the one that's owned by CENT280 man. But we want to connect to Lab7DB, right? That's the one that we want to alter. So I put that in there. And PGSQL_man. Connected as super user, right? Pound symbol, not the greater than symbol. I'm in the correct directory. So now I go /I drop.sql, and I don't see those error messages anymore. If I do /A for unaligned and then /df, there we go. We just cleaned out all the functions that we don't need. So a good question that you might be thinking of right now is, why do I go through all this trouble to get rid of 34 of the functions out of the 36 functions that got brought in? Because when you write your own PLPGSQL functions and you list /df to show all the functions, you don't want to see those extra 34 functions because it's confusing. It's hard to find the functions you created. So it's basically, if you run into trouble with the PLPGSQL functions, when you include those, you have too much stuff to look at. Okay, so basically it's trying to simplify it. So when we add our own PLPGSQL functions for Lab 7, it's going to be easier to look at. Now, one last thing before I pause here. I gotta quit out of here because I don't want to do something funny like run init.sql as super user, because then Bob won't be able to use the data. I won't be able to use the tables. Okay, because it'll be owned by super user. Okay, so /Q, very important, quit out of the database so you're not connected as the super user anymore. And then I'm gonna stop there. If you ran into problems, then raise your hand and I'll take a look at it. Okay, we still have a few minutes left, so let's take a look at one more thing. Okay, so basically I cleared it out. So what we have left is just this. And okay, notice I quit out of the database, so I'm not connected as super user anymore. And then the next step is we're going to create a users table, so we need init.sql. So let's get to that. Okay, so I go new, copy this. I'm going to paste this, and I'm going to save it into my Lab 7 folder. Okay, so I got init.sql. And then we're going to have this file authfuncs.sql. Okay, so I'm going to make a new empty file. Oops, wrong stuff. Okay, and I'm going to select every part in this authfuncs.sql. And I'm going to paste it here. And then save this again into the Lab 7 folder as auth for authorization authfuncs.sql. Okay, and what you're going to see is that we're using the digest function, okay, to do a SHA-512 hash of whatever text that you have here. And then we're using the encode function, okay, which is not from PG Crypto extension, but just part of the things you have access to in PLPGSQL, to make a hexadecimal string. So basically that will make it look just like when we call do hash with the PHP function. So I called it do hash because it does the same thing as what we did with our PHP function. Okay, so even if you didn't understand how that was working exactly in PHP, this is how you do the equivalent thing in PL/PGSQL. Okay, then I made a make salt, which is just like what the same, serves the same purpose. However, it's not identical to the make salt in the PHP, because instead of the time function, you use the now function. It's just a different name, different function name, but it serves the same purpose. It returns the current date and time to the nearest second. So this is just like time in PHP. That's what now does. So functionally, it does the same thing as make salt in the PHP functions. Then make encoded password, make encoded pass, same thing. Okay, so you call this, and then basically it performs that calculation. Okay, we're not going to worry about any possible delay between when we make the salt and then when we make the encoded pass, because this time it's internal to the database, so there's not going to be any kind of lag, so you don't have to worry about it like we did with the PHP. That you're connecting from PHP to the Postgres SQL server and then into the database. So that's a little bit more of a possibility of a lag. Then I have an add user function. Okay, and that one's real simple. We just insert into the user's table, but we do it the right way. Okay, so make encoded pass from the password, make a salt from the pass in order to do that. And then there's a check ID function, which is again similar to the check ID, the purpose of the check ID function, that PHP function we wrote for project 1. Okay, so it does a similar kind of thing. The code, which is actually here, is shorter. Yeah, because we don't have to keep running queries on the database and executing them, because we're right inside of the database. So we just go select all these fields into the record from users where the email matches the username. If it's not found, return a -1. Okay. If it is found, check to see if calling the hash on the password concatenated to the stored salt is equal to the stored encoded password. If that's true, then return the ID. Otherwise, return -1. I think in the PHP function, we made this -2. It does functionally the same thing. But the actual code is shorter because you're directly connected to the database. You don't have to keep setting up queries and executing those queries, right, like you would have to from PHP. So this is preferable if you know what you're doing and you have a Postgres SQL database. This is worthless if you have a MySQL database, because it doesn't have PL/PGSQL. Okay? So if I try to contrast doing authentication, salting and hashing with PL/PGSQL versus PHP, PL/PGSQL has some definite advantages because you're already connected to the database. It's also way easier to test because you can test everything inside of PSQL. Okay? Whereas if you write PHP functions, you have to do some of the testing inside of PSQL and some by looking at when PHP executes, either command line or show it in the web page. Okay, so PHP is less direct, right? There's like an extra layer that you have to worry about. However, this works only for Postgres SQL databases. PHP, if you use PHP PDO, is a database agnostic way of dealing with databases. So as long as you can connect to a database, the commands are exactly the same. So if you had to manage databases and some are Postgres SQL and some are Oracle DB and some are MySQL, then the PHP solution is preferable, okay, by a lot, because then you only have one set of code to deal with all the different databases. If, however, you have all your databases, they're all Postgres SQL, this is easier to make sure that it's working correct because you don't need to look at any PHP stuff. It's just PSQL, everything up from the command line. And so it's a more robust way of developing your application because it's more direct. You don't have to go through a separate layer of R to do it, right? Think in terms of Docker, right? If I go to PHP route, I need to have both Docker containers that I have to go into. I got to go into the Postgres SQL container for the database part. I got to go into the PHP Apache container for the PHP part, right? 2 containers. This way, I just stay in one container, right? Notice I only was in Postgres SQL. But drawback, can only be used with Postgres SQL, although Oracle DB has a very similar scripting language. Okay? And the other drawback is the syntax of PL/PG/SQL is foreign to most people. It doesn't look like Python, it doesn't look like Java, it doesn't look like PHP, whereas PHP, the syntax is similar to Java. So if you've done Java programming, PHP is easier to learn. So there's some differences. Which one do you choose? It depends, right? If you got only Postgres SQL databases to manage, I would do it with the PL/PG/SQL way. Okay? If it's going to be more than one type of database, then I would do PHP route. Okay? But if I had the luxury of having only Postgres SQL databases, I personally would go to PL/PG/SQL route for everything that I could, not just authentication, but every kind of function I can think of, because I can test it before I do any of the web page stuff, before I even mess with the PHP Apache things. Okay, so I can test everything before I go through that. So by the time I'm writing PHP scripts, I know all the backend stuff is working correctly. Okay, and to me, that's a much easier way to develop and debug stuff as you're developing it. And so that's how I would do it. Okay, we still got a few minutes. Raise your hand if you still have questions. Otherwise, we'll continue with Lab 7 next time.